Up tonight with us is Webster Tarpley. He was supposed to be on a couple of weeks ago, but very busy and very kind to come back 2 weeks later. He is standing by right now. We have lots to talk about. My goodness, two high security officials, not quite sure of their position, have fled Kiev and gone to the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic. Did you see that, Webster?
No, I want to talk about Ukraine from the point of view of finances, but I would also like to take advantage of this occasion. We're having the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta.
Ah, yes.
Right?
Happy Magna Carta, yes.
And my main point is that this is a fraud in the way most people understand it. Meaning that it is not at all of what you think it is. As people know, it's touted as the beginnings of democracy.
Yeah.
It's the roots of this wonderful Anglo-Saxon supremacy of the English-speaking peoples.
Right.
That we have liberty and the mother of parliaments and all these things. And this is historically very wrong, and it gives you the very wrong impression about what was going on.
Now, let's compare the Magna Carta and the Constitution. And that's really hard to do, but
I don't think that's the way to do it.
Not even fair. Okay.
No, let's go right into it because these are really not comparable. I mean, this is apples and oranges. The first thing you have to realize is that this is a revolt of feudal barons. It's in 1215, right? 800 years this week, I think. I think the Queen has been cavorting, the Queen of England, that is, around this issue. It is a statement of rights of feudal barons. Mm-hmm. It does not really apply very much to the average person. It is, of, by, and for this feudal nobility, the titled aristocrats, but they're very much a group of brigands, right? And for the average person, you have to understand in the structure of medieval society, mm-hmm. if you were a peasant or if you were a merchant sending, some horse loads of donkey loads of product, or if you were somebody in a town, the most dangerous person for you is not the king at all. The king is perhaps far away. He's quite weak. The person that you have to watch out for is the local feudal baron, right? The duke, the count, the earl, whatever it is, right? The local guy. That's your enemy.
Always played by Basil Rathbone.
Well, not in this commemoration because they try to make these people look good. So the idea is that it's the local feudal baron, and indeed, if the king is giving the feudal baron a hard time, that's good for you, because that essentially removes some of the pressure. It diverts some of the aggression and some of the criminal energy of this local feudal baron.
Right.
So really, the idea of giving more power to the barons is a monstrosity. This is not going to help anybody. And you have to think about this, right? It's often said that despite the historiography that you see in the English-speaking world, if you were a peasant or a townsman, an artisan, tradesman in the city, you'd probably be better off under a strong king who's coming down hard on the feudal nobility, rather than being exposed to the depredations and the ravaging of the local guy, right? It's like he's the roving bandit, right? The guy in your neighborhood is going to come and rip you off and then just go off to the next village. Now, here's the thing. This document, therefore, right? The document is completely misunderstood, and it's designed to do what? Well, it's designed to hide the fact that the English-speaking world is an oligarchy, right? We talk about democracy. They say, this is a step to democracy, right? Telling the king that he is not above the law. Well, all right, that's fine in general, but then what law? What law are we talking about? And we have to look into this.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it, of course, is that it's this anti-state business. In other words, I'm sure all the Paul-tards, right? Ron Paul, Rand Paul, all these characters, they're out there celebrating the wonderful Magna Carta, right? Because that's how they see the world, right? It's that bad big government that's being beaten back. Now, this process is helped along because the document itself is bowdlerized, right? What you see, if you see it at all, you're probably going to see an edited, censored, sanitized version, and this is what I would like to focus on. This is widely known, right? If you even get a decent quality textbook, it probably won't have the parts that I'd like to just read briefly because they're quite short. So they show you this thing, right? And it looks good, you know. You read
what does the word bowdlerized mean?
Bowdler was a guy who he presented Shakespeare, I think, and he cut out a lot of the stuff. You know, anything he thought was off color, there's a lot.
Oh, I see. A name, like Tarpleyized.
Well,
okay,
you know,
yeah.
like Boycott, Captain Boycott.
Got it.
You know, lots of them. So look, the Magna Carta 2015, right? Runnymede, and this is extorted from the king by these feudal barons. And here's the enforcement part, right? And there's all these wonderful provisions. What is the enforcement part? Well, brace yourself, because the enforcement part says there's going to be essentially a politburo of 4 barons who are going to watch the king like a hawk, right? These guys would probably be in the court, right?
Right.
So 4, it's like a standing committee of 4, and then they're part of a larger group of 25 predatory feudal barons. Now, so he says, okay, this is now the famous suppressed paragraph 61 of the wonderful Magna Carta.
Right.
So King John, I guess, says, we have granted all these things for the kingdom and so forth, but now here's how we're going to enforce it. We give and grant to the barons, not you, right? Not you. You could be a bourgeois. You could be an artisan. You could be a journeyman. You could be an apprentice. You could be a peasant. Right? You could be a monk. No. Only the barons. So we give this to the barons. The barons shall elect 25 of their number to keep and cause to be observed with all their might. And you'll see what that means. The peace and liberties granted and confirmed with them by this charter. Now, the remedy is civil war, bloody, destructive civil war, essentially private war.
Works every time, Webster.
Private war by these feudal barons against King John. Now, the specifics. If we the king, our chief justice, our officials, or any of our servants offend in any respect against any man, it means any baron, anybody who's got a baron on his side, in effect, or transgress any of the articles of the peace or of this security, then if the offense is made known to us, 4 of the said 25 barons, this is the Politburo, they shall come to us, or in our absence from the kingdom, they can come to the Chief Justice, to declare the grievance and claim immediate redress. If we, or in our absence abroad, the Chief Justice, make no redress within 40 days, again, in the judgment of these barons, reckoning from the day on which the offense was declared to us or to him, the 4 barons shall refer the matter to the rest of the 25 barons who may distrain upon, it means come after you, who may distrain upon and assail us in any way possible. In other words, the barons, if they declare themselves aggrieved, the majority of the 25, they can then start attacking the king and all of his institutions. In other words, all the crown apparatus. So they can assail us in any way possible with the support of the whole community of the land. In other words, they can order their peasants to also attack the king with the support of the whole community of the land, by seizing the royal, castles, lands, possessions, or anything else. Now, what this means is they can kill anybody. Except, there are several exceptions, our own person and the persons of the Queen and our children. Okay? So you get to wage private warfare. You can kill anybody in the king's court. You can kill the archbishop. You can kill the cardinal. You can kill the advisor. You can kill the accountant, right? The logothete, whatever it is. You can kill any royal official, any member of the court, except the king, the queen, and the descendants of them, until the barons have secured such redress as they have determined upon. After having secured the redress, they may then resume their normal obedience to us. And he says, I am prohibited, the king is prohibited from preventing the barons from creating these armies in advance, making people swear oaths of allegiance, not to the king, but to the barons. Indeed, the king says, I have to help the barons to recruit these private armies. The 25 barons shall swear to obey all of the above articles faithfully. Oh, my heart is breaking here on the wonderful faith of the barons, and shall cause them to be obeyed by others to the best of their power. Mm-hmm. We will not seek to procure from anyone, either by our own efforts of those of a third party, right, some foreign king, anything by which any of these concessions or liberties might be revoked or diminished. So that's it. Now, you have to put this in perspective. What is the principal problem, right? What is the main abuse of medieval civilization? It's simple. It's private warfare, incessant private warfare, right? You see, the knights, what do they do all the time? Well, they pick quarrels and they fight. And, by the 1200s, right, the 1200s that's the high Middle Ages, right? That's, this whole system is reaching, its completion and its collapse, I would say. But, the private warfare, which is the principal problem. Now, you can see how really monstrous this is. They're pretending that this is a step towards democracy. What it does is to anchor that oligarchy, which we see in Britain, all the way down to our own time, right? The kind of thing, the city of London comes out of this in some ways, right? An oligarchy. In those days, it's a military oligarchy. Today, it's a financial one. The American Revolution is a way of saying, no, we don't want this system where oligarchs and the kings that they therefore can control, because that's the British system, right? The French have absolutism. Louis XIV gives an order, and the count gets his head chopped off, which is often a good thing. In England, oh no, you can't do that. The king is weak, right? The king is, as some have said, a doge, right? He's like the Doge of Venice. He can't really do anything on his own. Now, that's a couple of hundred years after all this.
There's an interesting word, doge.
Doge.
It means almost like stooge, dupe. It's a cross between dupe and stooge.
Yes, okay, but it's not. It's dux, right? Duca. Le Duc. So the doge. It's the Venetian dialect. So I wanted to put this forward. I have seen this thing at the National Archives. It's also interesting. Who's willing to tell you the truth about this thing? Well, unfortunately, the federal government line on this thing, and this is at the National Archives and Records Administration, right? Downtown, that big building, and then in Silver Spring, Maryland, they simply omit paragraph 61. It's just not there, right? It's not there. The Constitution Society, to their credit, they have paragraph 61. Fordham University, the Jesuits have paragraph 61. Good for them. So you get the idea, right? When you look at at a source, see if they've got paragraph 61, and you can get this text. The whole of paragraph 61 is currently on the front page of the Tarpley.net. I'd like to send it to you, Jeff. Maybe you put it up for the wonderful anniversary year here.
Sure.
CNN, National Public Radio, they don't publish the text one way or the other that I know of, but what they do is this hype job, right? That it's a wonderful thing, that it's the wonderful roots of our wonderful democracy, and never a word about oligarchy. And again, I'm sure all the Paul-tards are drooling because of the Magna Carta, right? And it tells the government, right? It's the first attempt to fight back against big government. Yeah, but unfortunately, what they're proposing as an antidote to big government is worse, far worse than big government. And that's the other thing, right? If you look at European history, this is 1215, okay? So the 25 barons can run wild over England. If you look at the origins of the actual modern state...
1215, okay.
1215, 800 years ago this week, right? And they have a date on there and everything. You can check it. The three models you want to have in hand, and maybe four if we want to push it, in terms of the modern state, are simply an attempt to prevent private warfare. It's most explicit with King Henry VII, right, the Earl of Richmond, the guy who kills Richard III in the play, right? And the fact that the British are attempting to rehabilitate Richard III is a very bad sign. In other words, somebody there is saying, well, if we're going to have our full program of tyranny, we better rehabilitate Richard III, because through Shakespeare's play, Richard III is synonymous with tyranny, so we better get rid of that, that bad omen, right? We gotta rehabilitate. We gotta make them understand that Richard III is a national hero. No, the national hero is the Earl of Richmond, King Henry VII, the first Tudor. Now, don't confuse Henry VII, the good Tudor, with Henry VIII, the bad one, right? Henry VIII was a psychopath, monster, anything you want, glutton, sex maniac, warmonger, just terrible, right? Just terrible.
Sounds like a typical nightly news subject.
But anyway, the good one is Henry VII. And Henry VII actually says it at one or 2 points. He says, what we need is a big policeman. In other words, we need a big cop with a big club. And if any of these barons try to start private warfare, we're gonna punch them up. The point of that is that England, the idea of founding a modern state in England, had proven impossible until the end of the 100 Years' War. Now, this takes us from the 1340s to 1453 or 1455 thereabouts. That's the 100 Years' War between France and England. This is a very bad thing for European, historical development. I think you can probably make a case that it's the Venetians who want this war to take place, because this coincides with the time that the Venetians are fighting it out with the Genoese, and they realize that if anybody comes into that on the side of the Genoese, then that's going to be very bad for the Venetians. So the Venetians make sure that France, above all, which is the one that might come in on the side of Genoa, they make sure that France is fully tied up with England for 100 years, and indeed the Venetians are able to wipe out the Genoese. So that's the prelude to this. But then the English knights, right, from this 100 Years' War, when they get finished with the war, they go back to England and they have the Wars of the Roses, right, Lancaster versus York, which is once again a huge private warfare, right, that the Lancastrians want the crown. No, say the Yorkists, we get the crown. And it turns out to be Henry Tudor. So it means that you can't have a stable monarchy, a decent government in England, until a lot of these feudal nobles have essentially wiped each other out in this war. That is similar in France, right? Just a little bit earlier, right, 20 years earlier, we have Louis XI, right, of Valois. Right. And Louis XI is the founder of the French state, and he can do that, among other things, because the barons essentially get themselves mowed down in that same 100 Years' War on the French side, right? But the model for all this is Gian Galeazzo Visconti of Milan, right? A little bit before 1400, say 1380, 1390.
Did you major in this in college?
No, but I've studied it, and therefore what I'm telling you is accurate. So 160, 170 years after this awful Magna Carta, you have a prototype of the modern state with Gian Galeazzo Visconti of Milan, right? And you got to remember, the poet Dante is present at the creation of this 1310, more or less, say, less than 100 years after this monstrosity. You've got the beginnings of a modern state when the Holy Roman Emperor Henry of Luxembourg comes down through the Alps, meets Dante and other supporters, and they install the first Visconti, which then turns into this prototype of the modern state. That is it in a nutshell. That's the positive course of history, and this Magna Carta is a monstrosity.
Wow. All right. Very well said, as always. Be right back. Hold on. Okay, and back with Webster Griffin Tarpley. What a historian. Wow. All right, go ahead. This is amazing.
Here's where I'd like to shift to the world financial situation, and this will prominently include Ukraine. Actually, I recommend if you're in Kiev, get out of Kiev, go to Donetsk. It's better. It's so much better.
You bet it is.
But also the problem in Donetsk is that you're going to be under artillery bombardment, and we've had a number of episodes now in the past 2 or 3 weeks. I guess the time that I couldn't be on your show at the beginning of this month was because I was just in the middle of getting back from this.
Just returned. Yeah.
We also made an appearance. If people are interested, we'll have the New York City Left Forum, the Tax Wall Street Party, including myself, did a bunch of interventions, panels, and so forth. I think we provided a lot of the actual content for an institution which is I think flagging to some extent, but it could be revived. We'll do the best we can. So let's talk about Greece first of all. On Sunday, we've had the total breakdown of the talks between Greece and the so-called creditors, and that came several days after the International Monetary Fund walked out of the talks and refused to negotiate any further. So we've also got these, intemperate, insulting, boorish statements from Merkel, the German Chancellor, and Schäuble. And these people, I guess they've been given a manual, how to use the crunch method of negotiation, and they're trying to follow this in their rather lummoxy way. So they're signaling how hostile they are, how inflexible they are, and so forth, and that they demand concessions. Now, when we talk in this context about reforms or concessions, we're talking about something that's measurable in human life, okay? It means a finite number of deaths. In the same way, for example, if the Supreme Court comes out next Monday and says, we strike down Obamacare in the states that do not have exchanges, that's probably about 10,000 dead right away within a year or two that will be generated if the 6 or 7 million people who rely on these subsidies in the states where the federal government is the only way to get it, and because the reactionary Republicans, typically reactionary legislators, have not created an exchange, right? So you're talking about acts of governments that immediately translate into human lives. So we're getting close to violating the Nuremberg Principle. Nuremberg Principle, of course, Nuremberg Tribunal, 70 years ago.
Sure.
In Nuremberg in the fall of 1945, and it establishes this idea that international conspiracy to wage aggressive war is a crime against humanity. But there's also the other one. If you have people in a prisoner of war camp or a concentration camp, and you drive their nutrition, clothing, shelter, medical care, and other necessities
almost out of existence,
down below the level of what is necessary for human life, then that's also a crime against humanity. And I would really urge Merkel and Schäuble to realize that it doesn't have to be something with barbed wire around it. You can do this on a much larger basis. You can you can make a province, a small country could become susceptible to this kind of treatment. So, when they say, for example, the issue of this thing, as I understand it right now, is something that the media obviously don't want to talk about, because it's that the little pensioners should be hit again, right? The small pensioners of Greece, of course, they're all lazy and they're all profligate, right? And they retire too soon, and all these other lunatic arguments. But the main IMF demand is that they should be fleeced. They should have to give up part of their pensions, and also that wages should be cut. If you're lucky enough to still have a job, well, then you better get your wages cut. So it's extremely ugly, and one wonders, right, how can supposedly civilized, educated people go along with this? Well, I think there is a point to all this, right? I think you have in the ruling class of Germany now the kind of return of a low-wage philosophy, which they had in the 20s and 30s, right? You can read a number of German historians will argue that the National Socialist cuts in pay and pensions and so forth, those were necessary because the unions had driven up the wage structure in Germany under the Weimar Republic of the 20s and 30s, which it's nonsense, and it's also it's a monstrous argument. But you find people who make this argument that the wages were too high, and therefore a dictatorship was all you could do to get it down again, right? And I assure you that not a few of our wonderful classical David Ricardo or Austrian school economics, they undoubtedly believe this in their heart of hearts. But what's the point? Germany has a very strange structure, which most people are not aware of, right? Within Germany, you have had a tremendously high level of permanent unemployment since about 1980 or 82. And most of these people have been put into the Hartz system, H-A-R-T. And if you want to learn about Hartz, go to tarpley.net, and you just put in Hartz, right? H-A-R-T-Z, like Hartz Mountain. It used to be a kind of bird seed, right? They'd have canaries that would sing on the radio,
of course. Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Hey, but Hartz. So by now we're up to Hartz 4. At the time this began, Hartz was a person. He was the personnel director of Volkswagen Motors, right? Car producer in Wolfsburg.
VW.
Okay. So his idea was, we have all these people who are going to be unemployable. What do we do? So the idea, and not have a revolution, because there is that always lurking, right? You don't know. No matter what it looks like, it could get hot very fast. So this character Hart said, "Look, why don't we just park these people? We'll put them on practically the minimum necessary for physical survival, right? 400 to 500 euros, maybe 600 euros at the very most. And we'll force them to take any job that comes along, no matter how degrading, no matter how pointless, no matter how far distant from their previous station in life, right? We'll just force them to do that." And that's hard. And it's very hard to find out. Again, I urge people to read that article, because I don't think it's been written up in English ever in the way that I did, based on a couple of friends coming back from a conference in Canada, and I sat in the back and asked them question after question about this Hartz 4 system, and they were kind enough to tell me all these things, which I wrote down and then duly, checked a bit and compiled, so you can find it there.
Sure.
The Hartz system is between 10 and 11 million people, according to some estimates, right? In Germany. A lot of them are in the East. So the mentality, this reunification of Germany, right, the reintegration of the DDR, was that people began in the elite, right, people running these companies, saying, well, what we need is an East sector of low-wage workers that we can use for our world-class production. In other words, we're going to keep the the high tech, highly skilled, highly professional stuff, we'll keep that primarily in West Germany, but we'll get cheap labor from the East. And what if that runs up? Well, then we're going to get cheap labor from Poland. It's been pointed out that Poland has it's got a very low wage structure, right? As you could see that coming a million miles away.
Oh, yeah.
With Lech Wałęsa was not capable of maintaining the wage structure. But I don't think there's any Polish brand that is known in the world. Now, they used to have Polish ham, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
Krakus and Atalanta, they had programs on the radio about that. But other than that, what's a famous Polish brand? Well, they don't have it because they're...
Not even toothpicks.
I don't know. I don't think they have it. I'm quoting from Dr. Rao, right? Dr. Rao of Brussels has written a paper about this, from which I'm also borrowing some of this stuff. But the hearts is that I did myself. So Poland, a low-wage area. Now, you look at Ukraine. What's the big thing with Ukraine? From the German point of view, it's that this is another super low-wage area. And then beyond that, you've got Bulgaria, Romania, you've got Slovakia, you've got any number of places, Croatia.
Right.
And then you got the Czech Republic. Now, the Czech Republic is a couple of steps up, but surely their wages are way below those on the German side. So it seems to be what I think is a chimera, right? I think this is a fantasy of certain German oligarchs that they think they can create a permanent low-wage zone, and that with this they can compete against China and other people out there in the world.
Really? I don't kind of like their own little sweatshop country.
Yeah, and it's you can see this unfortunate idea of a low-wage economy. Notice that the United States does this too. I mean, the entire American South is really nothing more than a low-wage zone, right? When you have no union and no legislation and lousy working conditions and low wages and few benefits, right? Texas, Poland, right? Not so different, despite all the posturing, or maybe those are parallel too. And then you have to remember that at the bottom end of this, the competition would be, well, surely Poland, Ukraine working for Germany would be one side. China would be another one. Vietnam would be another one. But the American South is also one of them. In other words, there are certain sort of menial tasks in the world economy that are tending to gravitate towards South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, certain kinds of assembly plants, and so forth. So that seems to be what Germany is going for. But look, in the service of this, they're going to the brink now. We are now on the brink. This could blow. This is real. And you wonder, right? There are many, many arguments in play now. Would Schäuble destroy a system which has been so good for Germany? And I think you can see emerging on the German side the idea that if you can't keep this as a low-wage system, there's no reason to keep it at all. This is very foolish, right? This is this va-banque, right? When you bet, shoot the works for winning, right? Unfortunate. I'm not referring back to all the unfortunate precedents in German history about this kind of mentality. But here's the idea: Schäuble and Merkel I think they could tell the IMF to back off and the European Central Bank to back off. By the way, it's more the IMF. The IMF are the ones putting up. It's this skeletal lady, Lagarde, right, of the Hermes bags and the tanning beds and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. She's a French finance minister who forbade the speaking of French in that ministry. She said, everybody here speaks English all the time. So she's a perverted example of French, to be sure. But she's the one who's more extreme concerning the fate of Greece. So you wonder, what are they doing? Right? They have now taken this to the brink, and I do have reports, repeated reports from time to time, that the United States, right, Treasury or Federal Reserve, is trying to tell Merkel and Schäuble make a deal. Don't be crazy. You're going to bring down the entire thing. You're going to start a worldwide panic with this, and indeed, they may. But in the middle of it, it's the International Monetary Fund that seems to play the key role. Now, the European Central Bank is bad, but they're apparently not quite as bad as the International Monetary Fund. And then, to make it worse, the International Monetary Fund pulled out of the talks last week, essentially saying, now we've set you up, you other guys, right, European Commission and European Central Bank, we've set you up for failure, and now we're going to get out of here so we don't get blamed, right? And you'll be pursuing our agenda, but we'll get out without taking the fall. So now, what do you do if you're Greece? I have often argued that it's much, much better for all concerned to keep the euro as a means of defense. And the principal thing is those little currencies that you had in the past, right? The peseta, the lira, right?
And how many governments have they had since World War II, Webster? Over 100?
Who?
The Italians.
Yeah, but we're not talking about the Italians.
I am. I'm talking about that whole area. All right, go ahead. That's all right.
And then there are exceptions. Like Craxi was in power for 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
Anyway.
Died of old age.
I think this is fundamentally not the point. The point is, though, that the way that Berlin is treating Greece, it looks like they seem to want. They claim they don't want, but they seem to want to drive Greece out. The problem with it for the average country is those little currencies never coexisted in the same world with derivatives, particularly credit default swaps.
Well, that's a big issue. My point was this. Your point was perfect. Greece has had a zillion little currencies, okay?
Well, no, Europe has had them, all these so-called national currencies. The problem is, if you had any of these national currencies, of the ones that we've been mentioning, right, peseta, lira, drachma, if you had those standing on their own, they would immediately be attacked by speculation using credit default swaps and driven down to the point where their value would be virtually zero if you don't do something about it. And by contrast, right, and this is just an argument made by Helmut Schmidt, the former German chancellor, who knows the stuff, right? He was finance minister during the currency crises of the 70s. He said, then if you have the German mark, the Dutch florin, the Scandinavian currencies, those are going to be driven up, up, up. So they will be hit by unbelievable hyper-deflation. Prices will fall. Debts will be ballooned out of all proportion. So you'll be destroying the two halves of Europe, each in a different way, right? The southern European side will have their currency driven to practically zero, hyperinflation, and on the other side, you'd have the currency go up, 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 and you'd get hyper-deflation, and they'd be crushed by their own internal debts, okay? Now, that's if you don't do anything else. I think, though, that now, given this lunatic behavior by Merkel and Schäuble in particular, we have to think the unthinkable. No way around it. We got to think, suppose they drive Greece out, acting, I think, in the service of their idea that if they make any concessions now, there will be the left bloc, the Bloco de Esquerda of Portugal, will be next in line. If this Podemos movement in Spain can get rid of this fishy faker Iglesias, they might come forward with actual demands, which they don't seem to do, precisely because they have this rotten leadership. And then some others, right? Some others coming along. So if you're Greece, what do? There is a way to survive, right? You don't have to. It doesn't mean the end of Greece, right? Just because Merkel is crazy and Schäuble is crazy, it doesn't have to mean the end of Greece. What you're going to have to do then, if you're driven out, is have your drachmas ready to go, and you're going to have capital controls and exchange controls. In other words, before anybody can take a large... Is
that a central bank, Webster?
It's a finance ministry, primarily, but we'll get to the central bank. What you'll have to do is capital controls. In other words, if you want to take a whole big sum of money out of the bank, you got to explain what you're going to do with it to a government official. And exchange controls. You want to take money out of the country, you got to explain that to a government official. Then when we get to the central bank, this is going to have to be nationalized, and they're going to have to put out credit issues according to the resources they have in country. And they're also going to have to essentially establish an oversight on foreign trade so that any and all foreign trade earnings are centralized and put to work according to national priorities, not, somebody's desire for a fur coat or, a Mercedes-Benz. No, national priorities. It may be grain, it may be machine tools, who knows what it is. You're going to have to say, look, we have labor power in country. How many million unemployed? We have the ability, for example, we can manufacture the components of housing. Right? We can then start building, 3 to 5 million new homes. Tremendous things. Right? You can actually have prosperity under this, although it takes a very thorough kind of regulation. So I'll have more to say about that, but you get the idea. In other words, the dirigistic program, you're going to have taxes on speculators. You're going to have a Hellenic exchange tax. Right? That's the name of the stock market. Not the LaSalle Street, not the City of London, not Wall Street, but the Hellenic exchange is going to be paying 1% or more on their trades, right? Especially derivatives. And you're going to seize the central bank and run that under the finance ministry to put out credit for production. And you're going to be targeting that to your infrastructure, your housing in particular, public buildings, all kinds of things like that. Now, how fast might this come? Well, with Greece, it's supposed to be the 30th of the month, right, the end of the month. Now, let me also say, the idea that the apocalypse is going to occur on July 1st or something like this may be inaccurate. In other words, it may be that Greece will be driven into default, and then the people in Berlin will realize that they were not dealing with cowards or fools, and they'll stop short. In other words, you can default inside the European Union for sure. The idea that Greece would leave the European Union because of debt default, that's never really even come up. It's only the debt default leading to being kicked out of the euro. Okay. But even that, again, go back to the Panic of 1837 here in the United States. We had 7 or 8 states went bankrupt. Were they kicked out of the Union? No. So why should Greece be kicked out just on the basis of defaulting, right? Is there no such thing as a bankrupt European? If you're bankrupt, or you're no longer European?
Webster, we just have a minute left. Let me ask a question. Does it really matter if Greece leaves the EU?
Yeah, it does. It really does, and I'll tell you why. Because right behind them is Ukraine, and this is this awful woman, Natalia Jaresko of Chicago, and she has said about 10 days ago, she had a press conference saying that Ukraine is going to default unless she gets money from the International Monetary Fund.
No, Ukraine's going to default,
and
period.
the other lenders. Now, here's the big thing, though. Suppose you have Greece, right, faithful member of NATO, faithful member of the European Community, European Union, the whole thing. And then you have Ukraine, which is none of that, and you're going to prefer Ukraine to Greece? This is the kind of thing that begins to impact the ruling elites of little countries. They say, what's the percentage of being in the European Union if they won't bail you out at reasonable terms when you need it? And they go and pump this money into this fascist-infested Ukraine. So you get the idea. Jaresko and Yatsenyuk were in town last week. Yats the rats, as we know him. So this is something which is proceeding on a similar time frame. In other words, they're going to have to pay, debt service soon. Ukraine will, and then some other payments will have to be made. And so, if you have Ukraine coming together with Greece, and then we have lurking in the background, the United States has done just about everything possible to drive Argentina into default. The harassment of this crazy judge, and Venezuela is also a loudly proclaimed target. Now, what I would say is
they want Venezuela's 5 trillion barrels of oil. Trillion with a T.
Sure, they want to put they want to have a coup. They want to have all these things, but they may not get any of that. What they're likely to get is a default, right? Saying, I'm not going to pay you anymore, right? You're attacking me, I won't pay. So You add all that up, that could blow out the system. Also notice, 1929 to 1937, New Deal recession, 7 years, okay? 8 years in this case, but 1929 to 1937. Now we go from 2008 to 2015, 16, 7 to 8 years, same thing. So we're in the range where historically a secondary shock has occurred in this sort of a depression. So that could be it. So my word to people is be ready for some events that may begin to look rather cataclysmic, in the next 2, 3, 4, 10 weeks. And watch out. In other words, I don't issue these things frequently or lightly. Some people are out there proclaiming at every corner, right, that the bottom is going to fall out. I don't look at it this way. But given these political factors, right, that Greece, Argentina are driven into default and Ukraine could easily get there, then you see, that could turn into a panic.
Well, what was that old expression on the TV commercial? When Merrill Lynch talks, people listen.
I think it's when E.F. Hutton talks, people
That's what it was. I knew it had something to do with Tarpley. When Tarpley talks, people listen.
I hope so.
I do, too.
Get into a defensive position.
All right, sir.
And
Good
if you
advice.
want to know what that is, Surviving the Cataclysm, available through my website.
Thank you, Webster, as always.
Bye-bye.
You take care.
About what was going on.
Well, let's compare the Magna Carta and the Constitution. I mean, that's really hard to do, but
I don't think that's the way to do it.
Not even fair. Okay.
No, let's go right into it because these are really not comparable. I mean, this is apples and oranges. The first thing you have to realize is that this is a revolt of feudal barons. It's in 1215, right? 800 years this week, I think. I think the Queen has been cavorting, the Queen of England, that is, around this issue. It is a statement of rights of feudal barons. It does not really apply very much to the average person. It is, of, by, and for this feudal nobility, the titled aristocrats, but they're very much a group of brigands, right? And for the average person, you have to understand in the structure of medieval society, if you were a peasant or if you were a merchant sending, some horse loads of donkey loads of product, or if you were somebody in a town, the most dangerous person for you is not the king at all. The king is perhaps far away. He's quite weak. The person that you have to watch out for is the local feudal baron, right? The duke, the count, the earl, whatever it is, right? The local guy. That's your enemy.
Always played by Basil Rathbone.
Well, not in this commemoration because they try to make these people look good. So the idea is that it's the local feudal baron, and indeed, if the king is giving the feudal baron a hard time, that's good for you, because that essentially removes some of the pressure. It diverts some of the aggression and some of the criminal energy of this local feudal baron.
Right.
So really, the idea of giving more power to the barons is a monstrosity. This is not going to help anybody. And you have to think about this, right? It's often said that despite the historiography that you see in the English-speaking world, if you were if you were a peasant or a townsman, an artisan, tradesman in the city, you'd probably be better off under a strong king who's coming down hard on the feudal nobility, rather than being exposed to the depredations and the ravaging of the local guy, right? It's like he's the roving bandit, right? The guy in your neighborhood is going to come and rip you off and then just go off to the next village. Now, here's the thing. This document, therefore, right? The document is completely misunderstood, and it's designed to do what? Well, it's designed to hide the fact that the English-speaking world is an oligarchy, right? We talk about democracy. They say, oh, this is a step to democracy, right? Telling the king that he is not above the law. Well, all right, that's fine in general, but then what law? What law are we talking about? And we have to look into this. Mm-hmm. The other side of it, of course, is that it's this anti-state business. In other words, I'm sure all the Paul-tards, right? Ron Paul, Rand Paul, all these characters, they're out there celebrating the wonderful Magna Carta, right? Because that's how they see the world, right? It's that bad big government that's being beaten back. Now, this process is helped along because the document itself is Bowdlerized, right? What you see, if you see it at all, you're probably going to see an edited, censored, sanitized version, and this is what I would like to focus on. This is widely known, right? If you even get a decent quality textbook, it probably won't have the parts that I'd like to just read briefly because they're quite short. So they show you this thing, right, and it looks good. You know, you read.
What does the word Bowdlerized mean?
Bowdler was a guy who he presented Shakespeare, I think, and he cut out a lot of the stuff. You know, anything he thought was off color. There's a lot.
Oh, I see. A name like Tarpleyized.
Well,
okay,
you know,
yeah,
like Boycott, right. Captain Boycott.
Got it.
You know, lots of them. So look, the Magna Carta 2015, right? Runnymede, and this is extorted from the king by these feudal barons. And here's the enforcement part, right? And there's all these wonderful provisions. What is the enforcement part? Well, brace yourself, because the enforcement part says there's going to be essentially a politburo of 4 barons who are going to watch the king like a hawk, right? These guys would probably be in the court, right?
Right.
So 4, it's like a standing committee of 4, and then they're part of a larger group of 20.
Up tonight with us is Webster Tarpley. He was supposed to be on a couple of weeks ago, but very busy and very kind to come back. 2 weeks later, he is standing by right now. We have lots to talk about. My goodness, 2 high security officials, not quite sure of their position, have fled Kiev and gone to the DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic. Did you see that, Webster?
No, I want to talk about Ukraine from the point of view of finances, but I would also like to take advantage of this occasion. We're having the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta.
Ah, yes.
Right?
Happy Magna Carta, yes.
And my main point is that this is a fraud in the way most people understand it, meaning that it is not at all of what you think it is. As people know, it's touted as the beginnings of democracy.
Yeah.
It's the roots of this wonderful Anglo-Saxon supremacy of the English-speaking peoples.
Right.
That we have liberty and the mother of parliaments and all these things. And this is historically very wrong, and it gives you the very wrong impression